morning, everyone. So today I'm going to talk about the Lankavatara Sutra. And this sutra can be a little bit complicated, so it might take ongoing reflection and practice to truly grasp. So Chan, also known as Zen, used to be called the Lanka school of Buddhism. And Zen was for a long time a hidden tradition. So the Lankavatara Sutra was transmitted from teacher to student, time and time again, though eventually Zen communes became much bigger, and Zen masters needed a sutra that would be better suited for a wider range, a wider audience with various levels of understanding. So they began shifting their focus to look more at the Diamond Sutra instead, which is what I talked about during the last Dharma talk. So in the Platform Sutra, Shen, Xiu, and Huineng wrote competing poems on a monastery wall. And before they wrote those poems, that wall was actually supposed to be used for paintings of scenes from the Lankavatara Sutra. So this story resonates with both the switch from focusing on the Lankavatara Sutra to the Diamond Sutra in Zen history, and it also resonates with the importance of non-attachment to sutras. Non-attachment to words and language is a very important theme in the Lankavatara Sutra. The Indian monk Bodhidharma is often seen as the father of Zen in Buddhism when he apparently brought Zen teachings to China. So he famously gave his successor, Huiko, a copy of the Lankavatara Sutra and told him that it contained everything he needed to know. So needless to say, this sutra is an important one. The existence of Bodhidharma is actually debated, but what's important is that the story highlights how incredibly crucial this sutra has been to the development of Zen Buddhism. I used to think that some of the things in Zen must be modern misinterpretations of Buddhism, that certain things in Zen couldn't really be true. And then when I read the Lankavatara Sutra, it felt so familiar. It had said things that I'd learned organically from Zen because it had been so deeply embedded into how Zen is taught. So I realized that what I thought were misinterpretations actually had strong precedence in the sutra. Lankavatara means, loosely translated, appearance on Lanka, probably referring to the island of Sri Lanka, where this teaching might have taken place. So the translation that I used was, I don't know if you can see this, but the Red Pine translation, which I found really helpful. I think it might be the most recent translation, and there's other translations by D.T. Suzuki, and I believe other people as well. So the sutra looks at a variety of different themes, such as psychological projection, the storehouse, aka the repository consciousness, Buddha nature, as well as veganism or vegetarianism, depending on which translation you use. So the Lankavatara is largely a conversation between the Buddha and the Bodhisattva Mahamati. So Mahamati's name means great wisdom. And Mahamati asks numerous questions of the Buddha throughout the sutra. It's almost like we're getting to watch an intimate interview. And the Buddha points out how, one by one, these questions are projections of Mahamati's own mind. In psychology, projection can mean putting our own feelings or beliefs onto others. So, for example, when someone comes home angry from their job and then they ask their partner what's upsetting them, when really they're the ones who are angry. It's also seen in phrases such as, everybody knows X, Y, and Z. No, you're the one who knows. Or it's common sense that. So these are examples of what we mean by projection in psychology. And when we really have a strong problem with somebody, or when we really idolize somebody and put them on a pedestal, that too can be a form of projection. There may be disowned parts of ourselves, be them parts of ourselves that we don't like, or good qualities that we're too shy to acknowledge in ourselves that now we projected onto somebody else. In the Lankavatara Sutra, the word projection is used in a much more expansive way than we would in Western psychology. So it looks at how our minds project concepts onto reality. And then we assume that those concepts are reality itself. So, for example, the projection of a notion of a self and other, and a separation between those two things. So Red Pine has a quote here, and I just want to note before I give this quote that when we're reading about dharmas, if it has a lowercase d, then generally you can translate dharmas as meaning things. Uppercase d dharmas would generally mean the Buddhist teachings. So in this quote, we're talking about dharma as another word for basically things. So the quote is, just as the Diamond Sutra teaches detachment from dharmas, and the Heart Sutra teaches the emptiness of dharmas, the Lankavatara teaches the non-projection of dharmas. That there would be no dharmas to be empty or to be detached from if we did not project them as existing or not existing in the first place. The Buddha tells Mahamati, because the various projections of people's minds appear before them as objects, they become attached to the existence of their projections. So how do they get free of such attachments? The Buddha continues, by becoming aware that projections are nothing but mind. Thus do they transform their body and mind and finally see clearly all the stages and realms of self-awareness of Tathagatas, meaning Buddhas, and transcend views and projections regarding the 5 dharmas and modes of reality. The storehouse consciousness, also known as the repository consciousness, is the part of the consciousness where the seeds of all our experiences are stored. I work right now at a treatment center for addictions and PTSD, and I bring the storehouse consciousness into the mindfulness classes there, and I talk about how the storehouse consciousness stores every memory, every emotion, every idea, every concept. These are seeds that grow. So some of us may have more seeds of, for example, anger than another person based on how we grew up, but we all have some seeds of anger. And we all have some seeds of anger. The seeds that grow are the ones that we water. the seeds of ideas and concepts turn into projections. The seeds of I, me, mine. So we can dive into this aspect of consciousness to see how we've been conditioned to be the way that we are. Everything arises due to the repository consciousness's delusions. Through this understanding, we can recognize projections as they're happening and then cut them off. So the repository consciousness, or the storehouse consciousness, purified, is the source of Buddha nature. Even consciousness itself is seen as an illusion. The Buddha discusses in the sutra how bodhisattvas transform their consciousness into projectionless Buddha nature. So there was an interesting quote I came across when I was reading it. I couldn't find the exact quote again afterwards, but it said something along the lines of, enlightenment is to be free of projection. Even the concept of Buddha nature is to be let go of. So repeatedly, the sutra comes back to the concept of everything being nothing but mind, just the habit energy of projection. And Mahamati keeps trying to force some sort of conceptual answer of the Buddha. It's almost like watching a dokusan with koans. He keeps trying to get some type of conceptual answer of the Buddha. For example, he asks if things either exist, do not exist, both exist and do not exist, or neither exist nor do not exist. And when I read this the first time, I thought I had figured out the answer right as I was reading it. I thought, of course, it must be the fourth one. Of course, certainly things neither exist nor do not exist. I've got it. And I was wrong. So when I read it the second time, I realized that the Buddha was taking issue with the question itself. So he wasn't endorsing a view of things neither exist nor do not exist. The concepts of existence and non-existence are in fact that, concepts. Words and language. When I was on retreat with Guagu in Silent Illumination and Huato, he kept coming back to that as well, getting rid of words and language. So words and language cannot adequately define reality because they are projections of the mind. So to say that things exist, do not exist, both exist and do not exist, or neither exist nor do not exist, all of those answers, none of them can adequately describe reality because they are words. So this sutra is where the analogy of the finger pointing to the moon comes from. So Mahamati is looking at the finger, thinking that it will tell him what the moon is like, rather than experiencing the moon for himself. I also found some humor in the sutra. So I found it quite funny. At the beginning of the sutra, Mahamati asks rapid fire 108 questions about things like birth, permanence, men, women, so-called androgynous people in the translation, which I don't know if that's meant as intersex or non-binary people or something that approximates those categories or something that has nothing to do with it. He asks about monks, about the sense of taste, 108 different things. And then the Buddha replies one by one. A statement about birth is about no birth. A statement about permanence is about no permanence. A statement about men, women, and so-called androgynous people is about no men, no women, no so-called androgynous people. A statement about monastics is about no monastics. A statement about taste is about no taste. And it goes on and on and on. When I was reading it, I thought, maybe this is why Buddhists are stereotyped as being on mushrooms, because to some people this type of thing might be incomprehensible. So he's not saying that, for example, when he says a statement about taste is about no taste, he's not saying that Mahamati has no taste in the last one. This is another example of the finger pointing to the moon. So the ultimate truth is beyond words or any mere description. Words will never adequately describe the beauty of this interconnected world. So for example, we see a little being with pointy ears and black and white fur. I personally have been conditioned to call that being a cat. In my case, the cat's name is Slayana. We've learned to call it a cat and to see it, this collection of fur, bones, water, and flesh, as different than our own collection of fur, bones, water, and flesh, which we call human. We see ourselves as separate from the cat. The concept of cat is a projection of the mind. You see, sometimes young children, once they learn the name of cat, for example, then they see another animal that we would call a pig, but they haven't learned that word yet, so then they'll call all the animals cat. So the word cat does not adequately describe Slayana, and she is also not separate from me. All I can do is experience the feeling of her fur when I pet her. And I can work to do that without making that experience into concepts. This is the teaching of having a cup of tea and fully experiencing the tea. Like I talked about in the Dharma or the Diamond Sutra talk, looking at the cloud in the tea, and also recognizing that cloud and tea are projections of the mind. Even karma and rebirth are understood as nothing but projections of the mind. The Lankavatara acknowledges some of the contradiction to other traditions by emphasizing the concept of skillful means. That different teachings are given to different students based on different types of understanding at that time. So the Lankavatara Sutra is currently my favorite sutra. So the the Sing Sing Min says the Great Way is not difficult for those who have no preferences, but I have developed a bit of a preference for this particular sutra. When I first read it, it was incredibly inspiring to me. I felt like I had just learned something. It was a weird experience because I felt like I had just learned something that was so painfully obvious. But I had been blind to it this whole time. Though it also felt like there was a small part of me that knew these things, but that part wasn't at the forefront of my experience. this idea that everything I experience is through the projections of the mind, it seemed like so obvious, but that I had not recognized it. And maybe it made a lot of sense to me because of the continual use in this particular translation, anyways, of the word projection, because maybe that resonated with my conditioning as a therapist and made it a bit easier to understand for me. I believe the Suzuki translation uses different framing. I worked to maintain this awareness throughout my day. So we want to implement the sutra into our lives. So I worked to do this by reminding myself periodically that whatever I was experiencing, my perceptions were just that, perceptions, illusions. It also helped me cut other people some slack as well. I also want to briefly touch on the sutra's discussion of, in the Red Pine translation, it would be vegetarianism, I believe, and then in the Suzuki translation, the dietary recommendations are basically veganism. So this is how the sutra ends. I know it's a hot topic, and I want to emphasize that it's just one small part of the sutra's message. And this is one of many sutras that discuss that topic. So the Buddha states that all beings are interconnected and that meat eating causes terror in animals. It prevents practitioners from giving rise to compassionate thoughts. He states that while he did previously permit disciples to eat meat in some circumstances, for example, if they did not see, hear, or suspect that it was killed for them, he now forbids it completely out of compassion. There are also other dietary recommendations in the sutra. I can't remember them offhand. I believe there were things about garlic and onions which excite the mind, among other things. I can share from my own experience that since renouncing meat in 2018, I felt a deeper connection to animals ever since. And I believe I've become much, much healthier as well. So I'm going to finish with a quote from the Buddha. And like I mentioned at the beginning, the Lankavatara is kind of a complicated sutra for some people. So in order to fully absorb this quote, it might be valuable to begin by taking a couple of breaths. Relaxing the body. And then paying attention to my voice, listening to my voice more strongly than you've listened to anything else in the world before. This will help you concentrate. Projections arise when there is attachment to the misperception of different objects. Mahamati, because people are unaware that their attachments to projections of what they grasp and of the one who grasps are nothing but perceptions of their own minds, they fall prey to views of existence and non-existence, in which they are abetted by views of followers of other paths and of the habit energy of their projections. And as they become attached to different external objects, the mind and what belongs to the mind give rise to the projections of a self and what belongs to a self. I'll leave you with that today. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha.